Delroy Lindo stars in UnPrisoned on Hulu. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Delroy, I wanted to start by asking you, when Kerry Washington approached you about this project, what was it about the premise and about your character Edwin in particular that really drew you to the role?
I think there were two things. One is that Kerry and Tracy McMillan, the writer upon whom this story is inspired by her relationship with her dad, they wanted to infiltrate the perception. They wanted to change the perception that people may have when they hear former convict or former felon. They wanted to change the perception of that based on what Tracy knew about her father, because for all of his faults, there were some wonderful things, and Tracy wanted to shed some light on that and present a more nuanced and complex presentation of somebody who happened to have been in the system over the years. So that was one thing. And then the second thing in that regard is that I remember Tracy said to me in, I think, our first conversation, if you met my dad, you would not know that he had been in and out of prison all these years, just in terms of him walking into a room and his personality. And those components intrigued me. And I thought I'd like to kind of investigate those characteristics in terms of investigating the character that became Edwin.
That's what I wanted to pick up on next, because I know you did get to meet Tracy's father a couple of times.
I did.
What did you learn in those conversations that helped you then go and create a character? Because I know you're not trying to, recreate him on screen.
Right.
What did you learn
Right.
from him that helped you kind of then move on and find your own character, find Edwin?
He gave me some information. He shared with me some information about his upbringing and how he felt certain components of his upbringing had influenced the adult that he became. And there were a couple of very specific things that he shared with me that became keys. Some of the things were things that I related to, and they kind of became keys to beginning to unlock, for me, this process of creating my own Edwin.
You touched on this a little bit before.
So let me just say, he was very generous. He was a very, very generous man. He was generous with his time. He was generous, just a very generous spirit. And that kind of influenced everything about him, the way he carried himself, the way he communicated, everything. And that was really illuminating for me and instructive.
Well, I think that really comes across in the character that you built that's inspired on him. Just Edwin's generosity. He's been through a lot, but I think his he's charismatic and he's so caring towards his family in the ways that he knows how, and is trying to be a better man. I think it's just a beautiful performance and portrayal. Let me ask you, you touched on this earlier, but since it's based on not only a true story, but a really important subject of incarceration and reentry into society.
Yes.
What did you find was most important for you personally to get right on the series, either through your portrayal or just being involved? I know you're an EP on this as well. So what was most important to you about getting right?
I'm not sure that necessarily there was one thing, but a component that I really wanted to take great care in presenting. This may sound, I don't know, maudlin, but a rounded human being. Now, one always wants to present a rounded human being, but particularly given that this is a man who has been incarcerated. And so I wanted to, if I could, for audiences, share and present a human being that they could say about Edwin, well, he's okay. I mean, it doesn't excuse any of the mistakes that I've made, but certainly is not somebody for whom or with whom should be thrown into a cell and the key thrown away, right? That a man, a human being who deserves reconsideration. And that was important, because to the extent that there are so many young men, older men of color in the system in this country. And we all know that they are disproportionately represented in that community, in that population. I wanted to compel audiences to consider, well, if you've been in jail does not necessarily mean that you don't deserve reconsideration, that your life does not deserve reconsideration, a second chance.
There's no question that that comes across throughout all 8 episodes, just how much Edwin does. And he really earns it, especially with his family. Let's talk about that.
That's the key. Yeah. That's the key. Earning. And that's critical. You know, one of the episodes where I'm telling somebody that I'm speaking with that how important it is for me to try and do for my family in making the application to work in that restaurant, going down south in order to get my birth certificate and my paperwork so that I can become, in my eyes, a contributing individual in society. You know, earnestly trying to do the best I can for my family. And that was critical.
Yeah, let's dive into some of those episodes that you're pulling out. And let's start actually with the very first one, because your entry in the series, as we're with Paige, played by Kerry Washington, waiting for Edwin to get out of prison in that hallway. It's such a beautiful moment because it's really unspoken. A lot of it is, you know, body language. And I just wanted to know, like, how do you think Edwin is feeling in that moment? How did you play it? Because obviously he's, you know, happy to see Paige and she's there to greet him, but there's so much unsaid. So what is Edwin feeling in that moment?
Well, it's interesting that you say that you reference all the things that are not being said. All I can say about that scene is that I'm really gratified that you as an audience member or anybody else as an audience member picks up that which is not being verbally communicated. That's one thing that, because what that speaks to is, I don't know, I guess the success or efficacy of Kerry and I working together as actors, presenting that moment in the scene. Now, Kerry and I did not discuss, I'm going to do this and then you do that. Kerry did her prep and I did my prep and we came together. So it's difficult for me to actually articulate, because what happened when we were shooting the scene, is that the people who were watching let me know that they were impacted by what was happening. And for me, that is sufficient. That's sufficient. I don't have to deconstruct it. And maybe it's better not to deconstruct it and give it language. It's better, if it's working, to just let it be. And that's not to say that one doesn't prepare, that one does not adopt a very intentional way of going about playing the scene. But the only thing I feel that needs to be discussed is if it's not working. If it's working, let it be. Continue working in the way that you're working, and hopefully what the story needs to transmit will be transmitted to the audience.
Yeah, it really does. And there are other moments too, just to mention, like you said, the second episode at Parmesan Garden, when Edwin gets the job but quickly loses it. They won't hire a former felon. That's another moment, you know, not to kind of demystify the performance, but it's all internal and it's all on your face and in your body. Just so beautiful, you know, how we watch Edwin process his disappointment and the challenges in real time. I mean, really great stuff.
In that scene, I want to tip my hat to the director, because she allowed the space for me to. You're talking about when I go into the bathroom, is that right? Yeah, the director allowed me, and I'm really embarrassed because I'm forgetting her name now, and that's really embarrassing. But what I remember is in setting up the scene, she allowed me the space to work. You know what you know, I'm sure what you know about television is that it is really fast. Time is money, and the schedule just, it moves. And so one always is cognizant of the ticking clock. But in that scene, to the extent that she could, the director allowed me the space to experience what I was experiencing. So I want to tip my hat to the director in that regard.
That's great. You just mentioned your working relationship with Kerry Washington, and a bit of the process. It's just so striking to me how from that very first episode, the rapport between the characters, and I'm sure between you two as performers, is so transparent. It leaps off the screen. How did you find that dynamic as the season went on?
Right.
Because it's right there from the beginning.
Again, this may be a kind of a boring answer, but it really comes down to two professionals doing their jobs. Now, over and above that dynamic, Kerry had, and I'm sure you've read at this point, Kerry had made it really clear that she wanted me to do this work, to partner with me in doing this work. Obviously, that is hugely affirming. And so there was, because Kerry made it very clear on numerous occasions how much she wanted me to do this work, I believe there was an entry for the both of us to come together and do the work. And when one is working with a partner, in this case, Kerry, who is as open and as generous of spirit, generous in spirit as she has been toward me in this work, it makes it easier to, do one's job, show up, do one's job, and go after hitting the notes in the scene that need to be hit.
Let's dive into another episode that you mentioned, which is my favorite from the first season, which is the Alabama episode, the road trip that the three of you take, you and Paige and your grandson, Finn. How much did you know at the beginning of the season about Edwin's childhood and the backstory? Because I found that to be very revealing and moving and obviously traumatic for the character. And how much did you know about that before you got to that 6th episode?
Nothing, except the answer is nothing in terms of Edwin's childhood. But having spoken with Will, Trace's father, about his upbringing, he did not have that kind of a trauma specifically, but there were enough. He was from a very large family, and there were enough clues that he gave me in revealing certain aspects of his childhood that my having that knowledge, coupled with what was written in the scene, tripled with the things that I used from my own background, I'd like to believe made the work in that episode that much more rich. And I'll tell you, you're not the only one who says that that's their favorite episode. And I had no idea that folk would respond to that particular episode. But I think, I don't know, it's very gratifying. There was a lot going on. There was a lot going on in that episode, and it's gratifying that that's been transmitted to the audiences, and the audiences have responded.
I think part of it is that Edwin is so larger than life, and to see his origins, to know the pain at an early age. I mean, I think certainly for me, and I wanted to ask you this too, how much do you think that moment of what happens with his mother and the police really kind of influences his whole life trajectory? I mean, certainly the family moves.
No question.
Yeah.
There's no question. And again, I'm hesitant to talk about it too much. But there is no question that, for instance, when I say to my daughter, when I'm talking about what they did to my mom, what they did to my mama, and how scarred I am behind that, is really fundamental to who I have become. And consequently, how I wish to try and relate to my daughter, my grandson, even in context of the numerous, even more so in context of the numerous missteps and mistakes, just flat out mistakes that I have made as a parent.
Before I let you go, Delroy, speaking of mistakes, I want to talk about that last episode, and in particular, that last scene of, not the last scene, but your second to last scene of Edwin and Paige and Finn kind of saying goodbye for now. He's going to move out of the home. What struck me about that one, it's really very painful to watch as all three of them kind of process. But I also think it's really beautiful in how much we see Edwin has grown. I think it's a real moment of seeing a very different Edwin now than what we've heard Paige talk about. How do you think Edwin has changed over just the course of those 8 episodes? I mean, what was that arc like for you? How is he different at the end than at the start?
There seems to be a self-awareness. There's certainly not an awareness of success in terms of how I'm going to live my life moving forward, but there is certainly an awareness of the responsibility that I have to try and make certain, to try and take on responsibilities for myself. And again, I mean, that's huge. You know, I didn't, again, necessarily think about it in those terms, but looking at Edwin from the beginning, from episode 1 to episode 8, there is a huge change, I believe, in terms of self-awareness and awareness of responsibility, the responsibility that I have to take on certain aspects of who I am and conduct myself accordingly. You know, we'll see what transpires if there's a second season, but that's where I believe I am by the end of episode 8.
Well, it's a beautiful performance and a beautiful arc. Delroy Lindo, congratulations on UnPrisoned. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
God bless. Thank you very much. Take care. All the best. Bye now.